Stay tuned. But first, we've got with us Dave Banta. You just heard him, award-winning recording engineer, producer, and software instructor. He's here with his Dave Bantas home recording studio tips and advice, how to make your record and your recording projects run smoother and sound better. We'll begin our show in 60 seconds.
You've been listening to Sam Brown's For the Record, now heard on Wednesday night at 11 p.m.
Dave Banta here again. What greatness do you have for us this week, David? You've been on a roll. You've been coming up with some really goodies.
Well, I'm actually taking a break from the stuff that we've been talking about because I work professionally as a mixing engineer and a mastering engineer and I do mastering. And I have this rash lately, the last month or two, of people not knowing how to deliver files to me. And people sometimes don't even have the correct files, and they spend all this money working on a song, and then when it comes time to mix and master it, you can't do anything about it.
All right, explain to us what the files are and what the formats of the files are, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, first let me explain what mixing is. I'm really surprised. Up until recently, it hasn't been a problem. But actually, here's an example of how bad it can get if you don't know how to deliver files to a mixing engineer to be mixed. I'm supposed to mix, or I am mixing a major, I don't want to mention the artist, a major artist with platinum records who had a #1 song last year, and the producers did not know how to deliver the files to me to mix the record properly. And I called up the head of the record label and I said, listen, I don't want my name on this record, because I can't mix it properly and it's not going to sound as great as it can.
You know, that is not as unusual as you might think. There are a lot of producers in the recording industry and in the film industry who have no clue about, but they think they do. And of course, you know, when their backs are up against the wall, then they want to blame everybody else for their lack of knowledge.
Yeah. Well, here's what mixing is. Mixing is based on a thing we call overdubbing. If you think of like a stereo cassette player, think of the left side as one track and the right side as one track. A stereo cassette or a stereo tape or a stereo CD has 2 channels.
Right.
Well, what we do in multi-track recording is we have more than 2.
In film, they call it stems.
Yeah, well, we call it stems too, and that's one of the things I want to mention. The stems that you'll have to deliver to the record label when you're done with the song. Mm-hmm. You have to have certain stems to deliver. Basically what mixing is we have several tracks. You know, it started out back in the day with 24 tracks. So what we can do is we can record someone singing on track 1, and then we can listen to track 1 and record someone singing a harmony on track 2. And then we can listen to track 1 and 2 and have someone record a new harmony on track 3, and we call that overdubbing.
Right.
And that's called multi-track recording. And what you need to have a totally top professional record is you need to go to a top professional mixing engineer who has the gear, and you need to give them everything on separate tracks. Right. The reason you need to do that is if someone comes to me and I have each drum of a drum set on a different track, I can take the snare drum and I can fix it up. Or I can take the kick drum and I could fix it up. But if you gave me a stereo mix of the music, I couldn't go in there and fix up the snare drum and fix up the kick drum.
Now let me ask you something. Now this is not for film. You know, that's something we'll talk about that later on with our music editors. But for records, when you do that, if you've got 46 tracks of audio, of signals, everything from vocals to strings, synthesizers, etc., drums. You might have 6 tracks of drums. do you put it in groupings or do you send 46 individual
Yeah,
stems?
yeah, Mixing Engineers Group. I actually did this live album for this famous group in Mexico, and we had 140 tracks, and it was all live instruments. Yeah, we do group them together, but that would be something for a later show. But here's my concern. People come to me with with their session. Usually they bring Pro Tools. And it'll have stereo instrumental of the music, and all the vocals will be separated. And I'll say, hey, I can't mix this because someone already mixed it. And usually it's a guy mixing the music down in his bedroom. But there are several concerns that come with that. First of all, these people who have this instrumental track, do we know that they own it? Because it's typical for producers to give out a stereo instrumental of a track because they know that you can't really use it on a big record unless we get it all on separate tracks, every instrument separated. So it's really common to do that, and there's also people who pay to download instrumentals off the web, like 10 or 20 bucks,
Right.
and then they put their vocals over that. There's a problem with that. You could get sued legally.
Right.
If you don't have everything on separate tracks, or the producer doesn't have everything on separate tracks, then you should question whether or not you have it legally.
Now, you mentioned Pro Tools, and I had a discussion with a friend of mine over the weekend about that very issue, dealing with what you, the sequences that you're using. And he pointed out something which I knew, but he just said, you've got to be careful because a lot of people say they have Pro Tools and they really don't. There are different levels of Pro Tools.
Well, yeah.
And the big Pro Tools system costs 40 grand, the TDM. And if you're not running that, you're running Pro Tools Lite, which probably can't do
LE, yeah,
all
Pro
the
Tools
things.
LE. Well,
right.
Actually, Pro Tools HD is about the hardware, not about the software. I actually, on a daily basis, I'll take things that were recorded on HD and open them on LE, or vice versa. HD is about having a lot of ins and a lot of outs. Long story short, if you're going to use a giant mixing board, you have to have Pro Tools HD.
Exactly.
That's about it.
And that'll
Other than
open
that-
anything, regardless of whether it's a sequencer sending you audio tracks from Cubase, Logic, Digital Performer, Sonar.
Yeah, you can use any program you want.
Absolutely.
You can make a record in anything these days.
Exactly.
It's
Well,
just
that's
what's
same
best
film,
for
too.
you.
Right.
So basically, I wanted to explain that you need to have all your music on separate tracks, and you need to go to a professional mixing engineer and let him mix the music down to stereo, because there's usually a lot of expensive gear or just expertise involved, and if a producer's mixing the music down to a stereo instrumental, he doesn't have the expertise to make it sound great that a mixing engineer does. And the last thing I want to mention is the stems that you'll be required. Whenever I turn in a project, I work a lot with Warner Brothers right now, whenever I turn in a project, they'll also request an instrumental,
Right.
they'll request an a cappella, which is vocals by itself, and they'll request what we call a TV mix, which is basically everything without the lead vocal. And I remember back in the day, people actually used to use this recording to perform on TV.
Right.
But it's a performance mix, it's everything without the lead vocal.
Right.
And usually on a TV mix, they have you turn up the background vocals a little bit
Right.
when you do a TV mix.
Right. I used to do. I've done those hundreds of times.
Yeah, but it's important to understand that if you're starting out with a stereo instrumental, first of all, you're not going to have a record that sounds like Black Eyed Peas if you're starting out with a stereo instrumental, and then you're going to put all your money into recording vocals, and you're going to go, oh no, I can't do a professional mix on this. So whenever you start out a song, you should make sure that you have everything on separate tracks, or you just shouldn't use the track.
All right, David, thank you so much. It's interesting that you were talking about that, because a lot of what you were saying for records also has to do with film. And
Yeah.
that's what we're going to get into when we come back.
Exactly.
Is we have two award-winning film music editors with us. They've done as much work on independent films as well as major feature films with the major studios and everything in between, and they're going to be filling us in, and we'll be talking some more about stems and all of that. Try to get as much of that in as possible. Thank you so much, David. We'll be right back. This is Sam Brown. You're listening to Sam Brown's For the Record.